Hello, everyone. This is Gulmakai Saleh, the founder of the Golden Tree of Goodness. Today we have another special guest. Today is a very hot topic. It's tackling depression, stress, and please introduce to the audience.
Sure. Thank you again for having me. So today I'm going to be talking about tackling mental health issues like depression, anxiety, and suicide. And so just to introduce myself before we get started, I was born and raised in Maryland on the Eastern Shore, and I grew up in a small city called Salisbury. And I come from a very multicultural family background. My dad is from Tunisia. My mom is American. She's a convert to Islam. And so my family has been here in this country for generations. My husband is from Lebanon. And so I take great pride in having a very multicultural family.
Wow.
And I've been public speaking for over 10 years. And really my journey with that started as a teenager. Shortly after 9/11, I was doing presentations on interfaith dialogue and understanding. And after high school, once I graduated, I got my bachelor's in psychology and my minor in Spanish. And I then went on to do my master's at the University of Scranton in community counseling, which has allowed me to become a licensed mental health counselor. My first position after graduation was working as a suicide prevention coordinator, and it was also a mental health promotion program for students on a college campus. And so I did that for 3 years. After that grant position ended, I moved up here to Central New York, and I had my daughter, who's now 3 years old. And I currently wear several different hats in terms of what I'm doing. I'm a crisis counselor for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I've also started my own counseling business online, providing mental health support nationwide to Muslims who need relationship support or have issues with managing their own stress or just need clarity in some of the crises that they may be facing and going through. And part of my business is also giving presentations as well. So I do a number of workshops in the community on mental wellness, suicide prevention, how to help someone in psychological distress, coping with Islamophobia. And so I've gone out to synagogues and churches and done a lot of presentations within the community and trying to do more campus-based work as well. My last talk was at Cornell. And so I enjoy speaking. I love to, I'm currently involved in Toastmasters, so I really enjoy that. And then I like reading and yoga, guided imagery, going on trips with my family. And I think this topic today is so important because all of us know what it's like to feel sad, but not all of us know what it's like to have clinical depression. We all know what it's like to be stressed out, but not all of us know what it's like to have an anxiety disorder. And I think that we can all agree that at some point or another in our lives, suicide has crossed our minds, but we don't know what it's like for someone who is struggling with that and doesn't want to die. And yet the thoughts are always there in the back of one's mind that, they're fighting this inner battle that they don't want to die. And yet the thoughts are constantly there. So we definitely need to realize that, mental health is on a spectrum. 1 in 4 of us will struggle with a mental illness at some point in our life, but we all have mental health at the end of the day. Not all of us struggle with mental illness. So when I heard about, your show, and I love the title, by the way, Listen to Understand, that really resonates, I think, with the core of the message today, which is tackling depression, stress, and suicide, because oftentimes in order for us to truly understand what somebody's struggling with and going through, we have to use our active listening skills. And I find that oftentimes when someone in distress, like a friend, comes to us with an issue, our immediate response is to then talk about ourselves and say, oh yeah, I totally understand that. I went through the same thing. But you may not have really gone through the same thing. When you take the time to truly listen, to understand, rather than listen to respond, you can dig deeper and get to what really might be going on, which may be a lot more serious than you think. So as a society, we like to give advice. We like to jump to suggestions. We like to feel like we have the answers, when what we really need is just to build that human connection to truly support that person and try to understand their narrative. Well, the other question you had for me is, what motivated you to take the path to serve humanity by teaching us about the harms of depression, stress, and suicide? So that's a really good question. I would say that my journey into this topic really started in middle school, high school. You know, after 9/11, I found myself dealing with a lot of stigma of just being Muslim. And, I had decided I was going to wear hijab my freshman year of high school, which is the headscarf that I'm wearing, and dress more modestly. And I lived in a unique area. It was a city, but it had a small town kind of feel. And I was the only one in my school at the time who wore hijab, the only one. And so you can imagine that without a lot of diversity, that made me somebody that, was very visible and stood out. And I think certainly I faced bullying at that time. Certainly I know of other friends of mine that faced bullying during, the post 9/11 time period. But I was always adamant that I wasn't going to be a victim in the situation, that I was going to confront the Islamophobia through education, through being proactive. And it was my mom, I think in particular, who instilled this confidence in me that I should be the change, that if I was feeling sad, or if I was feeling anxious about what was happening around me, if I felt like I was being attacked due to my faith, or, somebody was misrepresenting me, then it was up to me to be the change and to be the voice. And so I started an Islam awareness club in my high school. And that was controversial because what it really was an interfaith group. So we had an atheist in the group, we had Christians, Mormons, Jews, all of us coming together to talk about the misconceptions in all of our faiths. And it was amazing, but it was controversial, it got media coverage. But it was an example of how bad things happen in life. Things like 9/11 are certainly tragic, unfortunate things, but we can't control bad things. We can't stop bad things from happening. We can only control our response to the situation and make a choice to respond in a way that's positive. And that was an example of how we could take something that was negative and turn it around to be something positive. And so many students reach a point in their college studies where they decide to change their major. And that was me. I didn't always start out wanting to be a counselor or get into the field of psychology. I was a bio major. After my first chemistry class, I said, this is definitely not for me. I'm not in the right field. And so I went to career services and I met with a counselor there who gave me an assessment and helped me figure things out. And I found out my calling was really to be in the field of psychology and ultimately to become a counselor. And I wanted to provide a safe space for those who had struggled like me due to, being mistreated for who they are or discriminated against due to their faith. And looking back at my own life, the people that had helped me the most along my way and my journey were those who were in the mental health field, whether it was my guidance counselor in high school who supported me and backed me in starting an Islam awareness club, or it was my career counseling advisor in college who helped me figure out what my true calling was. Anytime I had a sort of difficulty or challenge in my life, it was really my mentors and those in the psychology and mental health field that helped me develop some certainty in those dark moments and get through those times. And so there's a quote from Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that, if you want to serve God, serve humanity first. And I love that quote. It's something that really resonates with me. And for me, I knew that the way I was going to exemplify that, or the way that I could, was to become a licensed mental health professional. And I think we all have to look at what talents and skills we possess and ask, how can we use that? How can we use our talents and skills, for the greater good of the world? Otherwise, why are we here? So to me, I first got interested in suicide in my graduate years of college, where to me, it was something I wanted to learn everything about. It's, death is a part of life, right? It's something that we have to accept. It's part of life. But when somebody is in so much emotional turmoil and pain that they choose to end their own life, I feel like that is just one of the biggest tragedies to ever hear about. And when I looked at the statistics and the facts, we know that 90% of people who end their life by suicide do so because they have clinical depression or bipolar disorder and other major mental health disorders such as bipolar disorder. And oftentimes these folks, they cope maladaptively through the use of alcohol or drugs, which up those risks as well. And so I wanted to do my best as a licensed professional to try to prevent, the unnecessary loss of life, and try to directly assist with the mission of suicide prevention by going into the mental health field. Okay, so your next question for me was, can you share a story with us about how you have helped yourself or others who were affected by depression, stress, or suicide? Okay, so that's another great question. And I have a lot of stories, but the one story that I think stands out the most that I want to share is what I experienced in giving a presentation at a Muslim youth camp. And I'm not going to give identifying information, so to keep the person's identity confidential, of course. But I was giving a presentation on mental wellness, and I was talking about the difference between just being stressed, and having an anxiety disorder and some of those symptoms. And one of the symptoms of somebody who is struggling with an anxiety disorder is that they may self-injure in order to cope. And so suddenly I got a lot of questions from the youth in the audience about that. They were curious to know why. I mean, why does this happen? Why would somebody want to hurt themselves to feel better? And I was thinking to myself, it's interesting. I never had so many questions about that specific thing before, but it must have, been something that they had heard about and wanted to learn more. And so when I finished the presentation, a young girl came up and she said, "Can you hold out your hands?" And I said, "Why?" I mean, I wasn't sure why they were asking me, to be honest. And she goes, "It's nothing bad. It's nothing bad. Just hold your hands out." And so I could tell, my gut said everything was fine. I could trust her. And she dropped some items into my hand, and she looked at me and said, "This was me," and walked away. And the items that she had dropped in her hand were what she had been using to self-injure. So again, this is a faith-based camp, okay? And somebody sitting in the audience who has these tools that she's been using to injure. And that's when I realized that right there, we changed somebody's life just in opening up a safe space to talk about it, And I think sometimes we wonder as a community, what's a lecture going to do? What's a workshop going to do? Is it really going to be transformative? And I have been amazed time and time again in giving these workshops and presentations. It's not an isolated incident. I've had Muslim youth and even non-Muslims as well coming up to me saying, "Thank you for talking about this," crying. "No one understands me. My parents don't get what I'm dealing with. Thank you for talking about this." Just allowing that safe space to address some of these issues can be so helpful in reducing stigma. And as with my work, the other stories that I have, I work as a crisis counselor for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline as well. And there have been so many stories where I've been honored, honestly, and privileged to be able to have helped de-escalate some cases where people were literally about to jump, about to harm themselves, and we've been able to get them help. And so I can't go specifically into those stories because those calls are confidential, but I like to bring up the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline because I do believe it's a life-saving and a life-changing service for people. And so that number is 1-800-273-TALK. With my work in my mental health practice online, one of the a lot of times people come for different sorts of reasons. You know, they're dealing with a crisis situation. They are trying to heal their marriage. A lot of folks honestly come to me not really knowing how to regulate feelings of anxiety or anger, and just want to be able to be more mindful in their lives because it's beginning to affect their functioning. It's beginning to affect their relationships. And so it's always been a very positive and rewarding thing for me to hear from my clients how much counseling has helped them and helped them improve their relationships, their marriage, help them manage stressors more effectively. So I'm going to move on to the next question, if that's okay. Okay. What are the signs we should look for to be aware if a child is depressed or having suicidal thoughts? Okay, so there's several signs to be aware of. I mean, you want to look, if somebody's, for example, you're looking for signs of depression, you're looking at long-lasting feelings of sadness that are really causing the person to withdraw. Especially you'll see isolation, withdrawal from friends, losing interest in things that they enjoy. Maybe they really love to play soccer and all of a sudden you notice they just stopped enjoying those things that they loved. You want to look out for, you know, any kind of shift that's outside the norm in terms of mood, especially, or behaviors. And so I think sometimes as parents, there's a tendency to just chalk things off to like, okay, so he's just being a normal teenager. That's why he's sleeping so much. Or, you know, oh, she's acting lethargic because she's just had a lot of homework lately. But I think as parents, it's important to check in with your kids, especially if you notice these behaviors, rather than just to say it's typical teenage behavior, to check in and to ask questions like, in a non-judgmental way. I noticed that there's been a change in some of your behavior lately. For instance, you're sleeping a lot. Is everything okay? And coming at it in an open way, not, again, in a judgmental way that will make someone feel like they want to close up. And so also another misconception I think that parents make with kids in terms of their mental health is assuming that because they have a straight A student or their student is doing really well academically, that they are fine emotionally and mentally. And that's not necessarily the case, right? So, I mean, mental health, your child's mental health is not contingent upon the grades. There's people who end their life by suicide. In fact, I just heard a tragic story recently of a high school student who was, straight A student, was excelling in everything and doing so well in her community, and then she ended her life by suicide. And the parents really didn't see the signs coming, and they assumed because she was doing so well academically that everything was okay. So it's important to realize there's a difference between academic intelligence and functioning and emotional intelligence and functioning. And so it's important to check in. I don't know about you, Sister Gulmakai, but growing up, I never had a class in school that taught anything about coping with feelings of depression or anger or difficult life situations. I had no life skills sort of class like that, or a class on how to communicate empathetically with people, even though these are super important skills that are what get you through life. And I think there's been a change. There's been a shift in the community where there's more of a movement to have this sort of thing integrated within the school curriculum. However, we are still looking at a generation of youth that are used to instant gratification, and they oftentimes, I notice the youth today have difficulty with any kind of discomfort. Working on a college campus for many years, I noticed this, where it's like there's this desire to just kill off any feeling of discomfort. If you're tired, you take energy drinks. If you're feeling like you can't concentrate, you go borrow your friend's medication, just all this maladaptive coping to the situations. So again, I think the most important thing is just to check in. And also, if you do get a sense that somebody is suicidal, that they're talking about feelings of hopelessness, feeling like they are a failure, feelings of being trapped in their life. Check in with that. Don't be afraid to ask, are you talking about suicide? A lot of times people believe this myth that if you ask that question, you're putting the idea in the child's head. Whereas the reality of it is a lot of times folks will be really relieved when you ask that question, if that's what's on their mind. And so we want to be preventative and just make sure that as parents, we are addressing these issues. I know they're difficult to talk about, they're difficult to discuss, but if you don't take the initiative to talk to your children about it, they're going to learn about it from somewhere else anyway. They're going to go on the internet, they're going to learn about it from a friend. And so that's important to keep in mind. How are we doing? We good?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to keep rolling.
Yeah.
So
You could.
I'm going to move on.
Yeah.
I see what you are doing is a great representation of the golden rule. Please give us some coping techniques on how to teach our child or us adults to have less stress in life. Yeah, this is so important, the coping strategies. And I think that we often forget that we are human beings and not human doings, right? We are constantly on the go. We have this to-do list on our minds all the time. And again, having worked in a college counseling center, I would listen to some of the conversations that other kids would have with each other. And it was like listening to two people competing against each other in terms of who is the most stressed out. I mean, you'd hear one say something like, man, I had so many exams last week. I pulled an all-nighter and I had to take all these energy drinks. And then the other person would be like, that's nothing. I had, like 5 other exams the week before, and I haven't slept at all. I haven't been eating well. And it would just be like this badge of honor where people would compete with one another to see who was more stressed than the other. And I think that's kind of sad. It would be nice to hear conversations more along the lines of, you know what, I'm proud of myself. I took care of myself last week. I made sure I was eating right and exercising, and I've been trying meditation or whatever, and I've been feeling really great. You don't hear those kinds of conversations often. And I think, it starts a lot of times in elementary school. I remember as a child being given so much homework that there was very little time to do the things that were important in order to protect my own mental health, the things that I enjoyed, the things that I was passionate about. And so I remember going into college, I was like, man, is it going to be as hard as it was for me in middle school and high school with the homework? And surprisingly, it's much easier, but still that stress that you build up from all those years and having to get everything done and being up until 10 o'clock at night and not getting the sleep that you need. And then you've got to wake up early in the morning. there needs to be more time to be mindful. And what I mean by mindfulness is being present in the moment, not worrying about the past, right? Not worrying about the future, but just accepting where you are in the moment, not having that ongoing to-do list constantly in your head. And so a big thing that I get from parents is, well, yeah, that's all nice, the mindfulness and everything, but I don't have time to be mindful. And I think I would like to, I think that time management is a misnomer, honestly, because there's no such thing as managing time. We all have the same 24 hours in our day. We don't get more, we don't get less. And what you do is you manage yourself. And so you have to manage yourself and make that time. I mean, I know I have a little one as well. It's tough. And you have a 3-year-old, but you can, I think as parents, you can model these mindfulness behaviors as well. You can do these activities with your kids as well. There's all kinds of books like Good Night Yoga, Good Morning Yoga, that you can sit with your child and do them. And then the bonus is they're learning, but you're also getting that chance to relax and do that deep breathing and be mindful in that moment. So what final advice do you have for the audience? Okay, so I would say my final advice is that part of creating an inclusive and a harmonious society is not for us to just care about our own mental health, but for us to also care about the mental health of our neighbors and friends and our community and those people from different backgrounds and cultures that we may not understand. But in order for us to really look at that big picture of the community intervention, it really all starts with yourself. It starts with you, and you have to ask yourself those questions. Do you know who you are? Are you somebody that has trouble regulating your emotions? Do you ever feel like you get really angry and stressed over small things? Are you struggling in your marital relationship? And if you can answer yes to any of these, and I think we've all struggled with those things at different points in our lives, then I would say that, get mental health support for yourself. I think anybody can benefit. And what I find is interesting in the community is we often find it easier to tell other people to go see a counselor, get mental health support, or see a psychiatrist and get that intervention. But when it comes to ourselves, we are more hesitant to do that. And so I think that the biggest way to bust mental health stigma is when you can look at somebody in the face who's struggling, and after having that active listening conversation with them, you can say, I know a great counselor and he or she really helped me. And I think that therapy is something beneficial, and here's how it helped me. Because that self-disclosure helps people recognize that going to a counselor doesn't mean that you're weak or you're crazy. It's a part of life. Just like when you have a broken leg, you go to a doctor and you get it fixed. And it's the same thing with mental health issues. Yet we create so many unnecessary barriers to getting that support because of all the misconceptions out there. Okay, what other plans do you have for yourself? So my plan is to keep doing what I'm doing, to keep shattering the stigma associated with talking about these issues, because stigma and shame cannot survive when we talk about issues like depression and anxiety and suicide and other mental health related issues. I have more events I'll be speaking at in the spring, God willing, and then I just would like to say to those who are tuning in, if any of these topics have resonated with you that I discussed today, please reach out. I would love to see if there's an opportunity to come speak in your community. And I'd love to even just hear your thoughts on some of the things I talked about today. I'm continuing to provide my sessions online at anisadiab.com, and my goal is really to make mental health support more accessible and less stigmatizing. I've also been doing a mental health campaign during Eid al-Adha with a poster campaign and videos. I just started that this year, and you can check that out at muslimstalkaboutmentalhealth.com. And I just wanted to put in a plug really for an organization that I've been contributing to, and it's called Practical Muslim, which is founded by Brother Muhammad Hamoud, and it's a digital hub that's designed to represent Muslims living in the West through storytelling, and it's a really great platform because we talk about issues that are often stigmatized within the community, and they're real stories, and they're coming from professionals in the community. And so if you have a story you'd like to share there, or if you just like to check it out, it's the website is practicalmuslim.org, I believe. Please tell the audience where they can reach you. So people can reach me at my website, anisadiab.com, or muslimstalkaboutmentalhealth.com. And then also you can check out my Facebook page, Anisa Diab, counselor, life coach, speaker. I think I think I've covered all the questions. Yeah, if anyone has any comments or questions, now is the time. As parents, we struggle between our needs from children as much. We struggle between our needs from children as much as providing them with their needs. For example, sometimes it's defeating when you as a parent feel like we are doing everything we can for our children, but we get an unappreciative response. Sometimes we realize that it is not a reaction against us, but because the child is so deep in their issue, how do we manage our own frustrations? That's a really good point. And I don't have a teenager yet, so it's hard for me to relate to that personally. But I mean, I've had a lot of clients who I know are doing a wonderful job as parents. They're checking in, they're having open conversations with their kids, but you know, it's that age can be really tough, and they're trying to discover who they are. They're dealing with a lot of peer pressure. And I think, you know, we're living in a day and age where there's so many things that we didn't have to go through as children, like the social media, and even cyberbullying. You know, we don't a lot of times, like if you were bullied, you'd leave that at school, right? And you'd come home. But now the bullying can even follow you on the internet. And that's really tough. And I think that it's important as parents to take care of yourself, to make sure that you're taking care of your mental health, and that, you know, if you need to get counseling for yourself, get counseling, get help, you know, find some ways to take a time out, because it's normal to see this kind of behavior happening. And, you know, it's a frustrating time period, but at the same time, you know, it still can be hurtful on our ends. And so, you know, take the time out for yourself, for your own self-care, exercise, meditate, take lots of deep breaths with your kids. Deep breathing is so important in terms of just preventing that fight-flight response. So when we take deep breaths, it actually acts as a way in which to trigger the rest digest response, it's called. So taking those deep breaths, there's so many nice apps out there like Insight Timer where you can do guided meditations. But just, you know, take the time out for yourself, and you know what you need to do to calm down, so that you can go back to the conversations that you're having in a way that's modeling appropriate communication, because we forget that although they are not communicating effectively, they're looking to us still as a guide and a model. And so as much as they act like they are not watching you, or they don't care about what you might have to say, they really do on the inside. I think they are observing, and they are watching. And so just keep modeling what you want them to be, is the bottom line. So I think I want to clarify something. There's something coming up about yoga, and I think why I'm mentioning that, or why I'm bringing that up. So what I'm bringing up in today's conversation is mindfulness as a practice. And mindfulness, or staying present or in the moment, is central to many different faiths, okay? It's central in a lot of different religions, but also central to Islam itself. Like when you look at Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and at the time of revelation, he was actually in a state of meditation in Ghar Hira when Prophet Gabriel came to him. And so meditation, these practices of being mindful, they're found in not just in other faiths, but also in Islam as well. Prayer is a form of meditation, of being mindful, where you're focused on that relationship between God. And so yoga, I think somebody's asking about yoga, and that's it's another tool. And I bring it up because this is what research has highlighted as being effective. In fact, they did a study. It was between, I believe it was in Malaysia, looking at the 5 daily prayers and the effect of that on mental health. And they found that people who prayed 5 times a day had a reduction in cardiovascular disease, and they were better able to cope with stress. And so a lot of those moves in prayer are similar to that of yoga and these other movements, which is pretty incredible. So it's not, these practices aren't based, like yoga is not based in a certain religious ideology. It can be used by anybody of any faith. So I'm not advocating for one particular belief system here. One person said, do you have any tips for self-care? Do you want me to address that one, or do you want me to?
No, you could.
Okay, yes. So I think my biggest tip for self-care is really 2 things. One, watch your thoughts, okay? Watch your thinking and the self-talk that you have every day. And also watch your breathing, okay, which I spoke on a little earlier. But many of us don't realize how powerful our thoughts are, okay? So if you are, for example, embarrassed, what's going to happen to your face? You're going to blush. It's going to turn red, okay? That's an example of how a thought created a somatic reaction right there in the moment. And so when we have negative thoughts, when we tell ourselves that you're a failure, or you're stupid, or why can't you get this right, when we're negative with ourselves, it's like a poison on the body. And actually there's a really interesting book that I recommend. It's called Hidden Messages in Water, by Dr. Masaru Emoto, and he talks about how our bodies are mostly made up of water. And so water has its own sort of energy. He was looking as a scientist at the different water molecules under the microscope, water molecules that have been said to it, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're the devil. And it's amazing. These water molecules look so ugly and misshapen. And then he looked at water molecules that had been said to it, you're beautiful, you're wonderful, I love you. And they had this beautiful design and pattern to them that was very symmetrical. And so he argues that, when we say these things to ourselves, we're poisoning ourselves. So we have to watch our own self-talk in terms of our self-care. And then breathing, as I mentioned again, many of us don't breathe the right way. It's just a simple thing. It's really, and I know some people roll their eyes at me and they're like, really? Breathing, is it going to do anything? But that's the way that you control your flight, fight response and your rest, digest response. And many of us just don't get enough oxygen to our brains. So when we don't have enough oxygen to our brains, we don't think appropriately. We have difficulty regulating our emotions. And so anytime you're in a difficult situation, just take some deep breaths. It's as simple as that. But there's so many apps out there that can also remind you to take care of yourself and to do these things. And so I'd encourage you to download them. My favorite is Insight Timer personally, but I know there are many others out there as well. What else? Any other questions?
Does anyone have other questions? Ask your question. Let me see.
I see one. Is there an answer for this when you feel depressed and you don't find logical reason? And I say I am depressed, but I don't know why. Yeah, can I answer that? Is that okay? Since I'm,
Sure.
um, so again, feeling depressed and there, a lot of times we use this word, right? I'm feeling depressed, but what we really mean to say is I'm feeling sad, okay? Which is an emotion that everyone experiences. But if some person feels depressed to the point that, especially if they don't know why, they find themselves all of a sudden having trouble getting up in the morning, getting up for work, not just losing pleasure in things that they enjoy doing, difficulty concentrating, overeating, maybe not eating enough, the extremes, oversleeping and not sleeping enough. Sometimes it's due to a chemical imbalance, right? It's not. Sometimes, I know I've had colleagues that I've talked to who've been open about their experience with depression, and even some of them have said, I just woke up this one day and there was no rhyme or reason for it, but I just felt like I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't function. And so sometimes there's not a causal explanation in terms of a situation, because there may be a genetic predisposition to it. It may be a chemical imbalance. We've got to remember that the brain is an organ, just like any other organ, so it's susceptible to pathology. And so I would say, if you said I am depressed but I don't know why, I would encourage you to reach out to a professional mental health provider and in order to help you find those answers, because treatment's out there for that.
We could do here, Willie.
Do some more short.
If there's any.
Yeah, so I see someone, Salah is the best form of meditation. And so again, nobody, that is true. In a lot of ways, people find what works best for them, right? So for different people, they have their own coping strategies for what they're going through. But I notice a lot of times in the community, when somebody's depressed, the immediate response, especially in faith-based communities, is, well, it means you're weak in faith. It means that you just need to pray to God. You need to pick up the Quran, right? And so to say that to somebody is insensitive, because if somebody had a broken leg, you would tell them, go to a doctor. You wouldn't say, brother, sister, just put your hands up in prayer and ask God to heal you, right? Because God, has sent other people to help you. And so it's the same in terms of all these coping strategies that I'm talking about. And there's no one right or wrong thing for everyone. Everybody has their own toolbox of what helps them cope in difficult circumstances. And so you have to work with what's best for you. And some people may need more than that. They may need professional support as well, just like they would go to a doctor for a broken leg. Okay. Yeah, a lot of yoga. My goodness. Yes, you can. Okay, so you can pray and enjoy the benefits of prayer, and you can use yoga too. It's up to you. Do teenagers feel less inclined to ask for help from outsiders, especially if they don't want to involve their parents, if they feel they cannot afford the cost of therapy? So if you're a teenager, okay, you're going to be in high school, or you're going to be just starting out in college, most likely. And so I do find that some teenagers feel more comfortable reaching out to somebody who is not close to their family, somebody who is a professional, who is on the outside of the picture, who can give them a more objective perspective of what they're going through and a professional viewpoint. And so if you're a teenager, you're in high school, most likely if you're in high school, you have a guidance counselor office with people who are trained in providing mental health counseling. Not all schools have that, but most of the ones that I am aware of do. And so I think that as a parent, it's a wonderful idea just to let your child know, like, listen, if you don't feel comfortable coming to me and talking to me about something, of course, I hope you would be, just to let you know, you have a guidance counselor at your school that you can talk to, and you can feel free to make an appointment there at any point. The same thing with colleges, which really nice is that most colleges have college campus counseling centers. And a lot of them are made up of psychiatrists, psychologists, licensed social workers, licensed mental health counselors. So these are really trained professionals. And it's free. I mean, most of the time, these services are free to your kids. So I think talk to your kids about these services and encourage them to access it. I mean, sometimes people can't afford the cost of therapy. And that's why I always say when I'm talking to college students, go get therapy now because you're paying for it already as part of your tuition. Take advantage of it and get that experience. Yeah, I see someone who said provide app names after the talk. I'll just definitely put that in the comments section. Tips to encourage people to get excited about exercise. For those who live in places that experience harsh winters, alhamdulillah, I'm blessed to be in sunny Florida where it's nice to be able to benefit from vitamin D, and exercise makes me feel easier. I recall it was quite hard when I lived in Minnesota. Yes, I live in a very, very snowy area as well. And exercise is so important to our mental health. We've got to realize that mental health is holistic and it's connected to everything else. So when your body, doesn't feel good because you're not exercising it, your mind is not going to feel good either. Exercise is a natural mood booster. And whenever you exercise, you release endorphins. And so especially for people who are struggling with clinical depression or anxiety, that is one of the first coping strategies that will be recommended, is to really exercise, make it a priority in order to elevate your mood, and also just to again, it's a mindfulness activity. You're breathing, you're focusing on what you're doing in the moment, and that's helping you relax as well. And so, yeah, it's not fun. Not everybody likes to exercise in the moment, but afterwards you feel good and it helps your mental health. It helps you come back to your work with more clarity and energy. Thank you again for having me. It was an honor. Sorry it didn't really work out with the voice, but I think we managed okay.
Yeah, you did.
Well, thank you again.
Yeah. Okay, I will type.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita.
Thank you again for having me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.